Have you ever noticed how the headline numbers on the morning news often just completely obscure the reality of what's actually happening on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it happens all the time.
Right. Like you look at the ticker at the bottom of the screen, and it says the national unemployment rate in early 2026 is sitting at a really comfortable 4.3%.
Yeah, and on paper it looks perfectly stable. It creates this illusion of macroeconomic calm, I guess you could say.
Exactly. You see that single digit, and you just assume the labor market is humming along without any structural friction.
Right, but beneath that surface stability, there's actually a massive disruption underway.
And to really understand the mechanics of it, we are looking at a fascinating new paper by Jonathan H. Westover, PhD. He analyzes the March 2026 labor market data.
It's a really revealing piece of research.
It really is. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore the hidden human and organizational costs of, well, massive workforce restructuring.
Because we have to talk about the federal government here.
Yeah, we do. They've just eliminated an astonishing 355,000 positions since late 2024. I mean, that is 11.8% of its entire workforce.
It's a huge number, but we also need to look at this objectively, you know?
Yes, of course.
Those cuts aren't just happening in a vacuum. There are severe budget deficits, shifting policy
The
priorities.
clear mandates from voters to rein in spending.
Exactly. From a purely fiscal standpoint, an organization looking at those pressures, well, they have to reduce overhead.
Sure.
But the overarching theme in the data is that labor market disruptions are never uniform. Like, in March 2026 alone, the federal government contracted by another 18,000 jobs.
Wow.
Yet at the exact same time, the healthcare sector added 76,000 jobs, and construction added 26,000.
Okay, let's unpack this because whether you work in the public sector or tech or healthcare or literally anywhere else, understanding how organizations handle massive layoffs is basically a matter of career survival.
It really is. It affects everyone in the ecosystem.
So I want to challenge the fundamental premise here. If an organization, public or private, cuts 11.8% of its workforce, the immediate assumption is that they are saving a fortune.
Right, the idea that you become lean and mean.
Yeah. You remove those salaries, trim the fat, and the organization becomes way more efficient. I mean, that is just basic math, isn't it?
Well, that is the assumption that drives almost every major corporate restructuring, and yet the research just consistently proves it wrong.
Really? How so?
Westover actually cites a landmark 2002 study by Cascio. He looked at the financial consequences of downsizing.
Okay.
And Cascio found that downsizing organizations rarely outperform their peers financially. In fact, very often they actually underperform.
I'm struggling to understand the counting on that. Like, if you eliminate thousands of salaries, where does the money go?
It's a good question.
How do you not see an immediate financial upside?
Because the balance sheet only tracks the immediate reduction in payroll. It completely ignores all the friction costs.
Oh, right. Like what?
Well, you have severance packages, outplacement services, increased unemployment insurance premiums,
Ah, yeah.
and often the cost of hiring really expensive contractors just a few months later to do the exact same work.
Because the organization literally cannot function without them.
Exactly. But the most devastating financial hit comes from the loss of what researchers call tacit knowledge.
Tacit knowledge. Okay, so like the unwritten rules of how a place actually operates.
Spot on. It breaks down into three distinct areas. First is procedural knowledge.
Okay.
So the official employee handbook might say a regulatory approval takes 90 days through a specific portal.
Sure, the official way.
But the tacit procedural knowledge is knowing that portal always crashes.
Oh, right.
So you have to manually route the file to a specific desk instead.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second is relational knowledge. That's knowing exactly who to call in a completely different department to expedite a critical review.
The office politics, basically.
Essentially, yes. And third is institutional memory. Knowing why a specific, seemingly annoying policy was put in place a decade ago.
So you don't repeat some catastrophic mistake.
Exactly.
It sounds like trying to free up space on your phone by randomly deleting files, and you accidentally delete the phone's operating system.
Yeah.
Like you save storage space, but now the device is basically a brick.
That's a great analogy. And what's fascinating here is how this specifically degrades government agencies.
Oh, interesting. Why government specifically?
Well, according to research by Fernandez and Moldagazia from 2013, we aren't talking about easily transferable roles here.
Right.
We're talking about nuclear safety inspectors or epidemiologists tracking infectious diseases.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Highly specialized.
Highly specialized subject matter experts who've spent like 20 years building trust with industry partners. You cannot simply go to a job board and replace a senior nuclear safety expert.
Which highlights a critical distinction in the research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between strategic downsizing and just blanket workforce reduction.
Exactly. There are very different things.
Because the government is currently slashing headcount to hit budget targets, but they aren't changing the fundamental processes of how the work gets done.
Nope. The workload remains identical.
Right. But there are 11.8% fewer people to do it.
And Cassie's research identified a really specific danger threshold here. When an organization cuts more than 10% of its workforce, it triggers what he calls downsizing syndrome.
And the current federal cuts are at 11.8%.
Yeah.
So they're right in the danger zone.
Deep in the danger zone.
So if the balance sheet isn't actually improving because of all these hidden costs and lost knowledge, who absorbs the friction of that 11.8% cut?
The remaining workers do.
Right. Because I want to challenge the narrative we always hear about the lucky survivors of a layoff. I'm assuming the people who keep their jobs aren't actually all that relieved.
Oh, the term lucky survivor is a complete misnomer. They experience something called survivor syndrome.
Survivor syndrome.
Yeah. Their morale absolutely plummets, their stress skyrockets, and there is a profound loss of trust in leadership.
I can imagine.
I mean, think about the cognitive load. You are suddenly doing the work of 3 people without any additional compensation.
Right.
All while constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if another round of cuts is coming on Friday.
But surely an organization doing a layoff uses it as an opportunity to, trim the low performers, right?
That's what executives usually claim.
Shouldn't a massive cut theoretically concentrate your top talent and leave you with your best people?
You would think so. But the friction of survivor syndrome triggers a phenomenon Trevor and Nyberg identified in 2008. They call it secondary turnover.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, when the work environment becomes that chaotic and the workload doubles, who's the first person to leave? It's not your low performers.
Oh, wait. It's the people who have options.
Exactly. It is your most marketable, highly skilled employees. The rock stars look around, realize they have options in the private sector, and they voluntarily quit.
Oh, wow. So the organization essentially just bleeds talent from the inside out.
It's a vicious cycle.
But let's look outside the organization walls for a second. The text brings in Brand's 2015 research on the long-term economic impacts for displaced workers. And honestly, the data is brutal.
It is very hard to read.
It shows displaced workers suffer a 10 to 15% wage drop that persists for years, even after they find a new job. Why does that penalty last so long?
Because a significant portion of their value was tied up in that firm-specific tacit knowledge we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. The relational networks and procedural stuff.
Exactly. Their relational network and institutional memory hold no premium at a new company, so they essentially have to start over on the value ladder.
That is devastating.
It is. And if you are displaced in your late 40s or 50s, those are your peak earning years. You lose the compounding effect on your retirement savings, you face gaps in health insurance, the financial trajectory is permanently altered.
And the physical trajectory, too, right? I mean, Sullivan and Funwalker's 2009 research is probably the most sobering part of these sources.
Yes. The health data is staggering.
They found that mass layoffs actually increase mortality rates. Job loss significantly elevates the risk of heart disease, stroke, and clinical depression.
Because job loss isn't just an economic event, it is a profound sociological trauma.
Yeah.
It strips away your daily structure, your social connection, and often a core piece of a person's identity.
That makes total sense.
And the biological toll of that sustained cortisol spike, just wondering how you're going to pay the mortgage, it literally shortens lifespans.
And when we look at the data for March 2026, it is clear this burden is not distributed equally across society. The demographic impacts show wildly different realities.
Right. The disparities are huge.
Like, Asian unemployment is at 3.7%. The Black unemployment is nearly double that, at 7.1%.
And Hispanic unemployment sits at 4.8%.
Exactly. Furthermore, long-term unemployment, meaning people out of work for 27 weeks or more, that spiked by 322,000 in a single year.
And we really have to look closely at the discouraged workers metric, too.
Who falls into that category?
These are individuals who wanted a job, were available to work, but simply gave up looking because the market was just so hostile. That specific group grew by 144,000 people in March alone, and they vanish from that 4.3% headline unemployment rate because they are no longer actively seeking work.
Wow, they just disappear from the official narrative entirely.
Completely.
So if we zoom out from the individual to the community level, how does a localized economy even absorb the loss of 355,000 jobs?
Yeah.
Like, if you take a region heavily concentrated with federal workers, say Washington, D.C., or Maryland or Virginia, the multiplier effect must be staggering.
Oh, it alters the entire regional ecosystem.
How so?
Well, when you pull hundreds of thousands of stable salaries out of a geographic area, discretionary consumer spending just evaporates. Local restaurants close. The housing market stagnates as people stop upgrading or default on their mortgages. And critically, local tax revenues plummet right at the moment when the community needs increased social services.
And you also lose the invisible infrastructure of the community, don't you?
What do you mean?
Well, those workers are the people volunteering at the local schools, or organizing community food drives, or sitting on the municipal zoning boards.
Oh, absolutely.
When they lose their economic footing, all that social capital just vanishes.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the reality organizations face. Deficits happen, mandates change.
Right.
Sometimes leaders have absolutely no choice but to execute a massive reduction in force.
Right. I mean, if you are a manager facing a mandated budget cut from Congress, the cuts are inevitable. You can't just ignore them.
Exactly.
But how do you execute them without triggering secondary turnover, survivor syndrome, and the destruction of the whole community ecosystem? Because clearly the standard playbook of locking people out of their laptops and sending a mass email isn't working.
It definitely isn't. And it really comes down to a framework developed by researchers Folger and Cropenzano. It's called procedural justice.
Procedural justice, okay.
The core mechanism here is that the human brain can process a negative outcome, provided it believes the process used to arrive at that outcome was fair, objective, and transparent.
Oh, okay. That makes me think of an emergency room triage system.
Oh, how so?
Like, if I go to the ER with a broken arm, I'm in pain, I'm unhappy, and I might sit in the waiting room for 4 hours.
Sure.
But if someone comes through the doors actively having a heart attack and the nurses rush them in before me, I accept it. I don't riot.
Right.
Because the rules of triage are transparent, objective, and I understand the criteria being used.
Yes.
I respect the process, even if I absolutely hate the wait.
That is a perfect analogy for procedural justice. The paper actually details several case studies where organizations successfully applied this.
Oh, really? Like who?
Look at the Australian Taxation Office, the ATO. When they were hit with mandated budget cuts, the traditional HR instinct would be to hide the impending layoffs until the very last minute to prevent panic.
Yeah, that's what usually happens.
Right. Instead, the ATO used radical transparency.
They held town halls very early in the process, didn't they?
Yes. They explained the fiscal reality, they walked the employees through the exact budget numbers, and they essentially killed the rumor mill before it could generate anxiety.
That's all.
And as a result, their employee engagement scores remained remarkably stable compared to organizations that operate in secrecy.
And the text also highlights the CDC, right? When they went through restructuring, they implemented a competency-based approach rather than relying on manager discretion or a simple last-in, first-out model.
Which is crucial for avoiding that ER waiting room riot you mentioned.
Right.
If layoffs are based on which manager likes which employee best, it creates deep, deep resentment. The CDC mapped out the specific capabilities they would need for the future of the agency, and they evaluated the workforce against those objective metrics.
So it wasn't personal.
Exactly. The employees who survived the cuts trusted the new organization because the selection criteria were defensible.
Okay, so fairness and transparency are vital for the people staying. But what about the people leaving? Procedural fairness doesn't exactly pay their mortgage.
No, it doesn't.
How does an organization functionally support displaced workers?
Well, the classic example provided is Monsanto in the 1990s. They recognized that the moment of displacement is just too late to start helping.
Yeah.
So they provided comprehensive outplacement services, career counseling, resume engineering, direct networking, long before the actual displacement base.
Oh, wow. So they were proactive.
Very. It dramatically accelerated the reemployment of the displaced workers, and it simultaneously insulated the surviving employees from survivor syndrome because they saw their former colleagues being treated with actual dignity.
It's kind of like an honest breakup, right? It's going to hurt no matter what, but if you do it honestly and respectfully face-to-face, you don't burn down the whole relationship.
Exactly.
But wait, if we have 355,000 federal workers looking for jobs right now, they can't all just get career counseling. Where do they actually go?
This brings in the Trade Adjustment Assistance Model, or TAA, and sectoral partnerships.
What are those?
This is a mechanism where local governments, community colleges, and private employers actively collaborate to build a bridge between declining sectors and booming ones.
But how does that actually work in practice? Like if someone has been a federal regulatory analyst for 15 years, how do they certainly transition into the healthcare sector, which, is adding 76,000 jobs a month?
Through aggressive, funded skill mapping. The sectoral partnership looks at the analyst's foundational skills data, compliance, complex project management, auditing, and funds, a targeted, short-term certification to translate those skills into healthcare administration or health informatics.
Oh, I see.
You don't leave the worker to figure out the transition alone. You systematically reroute their tacit capabilities into an industry that is desperate for talent.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because once the immediate crisis of a layoff is handled, the organization has to figure out how to function the next day.
Right. And the reality of modern work has fundamentally shifted. The paper dives into Rousseau's concept of the psychological contract, which is that unspoken agreement between an employer and an employee.
And historically, that contract was pretty simple, right? I give you my loyalty and decades of my life, and you provide me with job security and a pension.
Exactly. But a mass layoff permanently obliterates that contract. And once the workforce realizes that security is an illusion, well, you cannot put the genie back in the bottle.
So how do leaders rebuild trust when they can literally no longer promise security?
The text points to NASA during a period of massive contractor reductions. Leadership didn't hide behind PR statements. They held all-hands meetings, took absolute accountability, and expressed genuine empathy for the human cost. They owned the damage.
Wow.
But the most radical evolution of the psychological contract actually comes from Deloitte. They realized that pretending to offer job security was actually breeding cynicism, so they explicitly changed the terms of the deal.
What did they do?
They told their workforce, "We cannot promise you a permanent job, but we will promise to make you highly employable." They literally replaced the promise of employment security with a promise of intense personal growth and skill development.
Wait. I have to push back on that.
Sure.
If Deloitte is explicitly telling employees they don't have job security, but they are pouring money into upgrading their skills and making them highly attracted to the market, aren't they just spending millions of dollars to train their competitors' future workforce?
It seems completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Why would a company do that?
It's the retention paradox. By making their employees highly marketable, they actually build incredible loyalty.
Oh, I see.
The top talent stays at Deloitte not because they are trapped or scared of a layoff, but because they know their market value is compounding every single day they remain there. It shifts the relationship from paternalistic to a mutual alliance.
That is fascinating. And we see this necessity for resilience on a macro scale too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The paper highlights Pittsburgh as a model for regional resilience. They spent decades deliberately pivoting their entire economic base from a single industry reliance on steel into a diversified hub for medicine, education, and technology.
Right, so if a massive shock hits one sector, the city doesn't collapse.
Exactly. And inside an organization, that resilience is built through what is called distributed leadership.
Right.
Yes. The U.S. Army is the premier example of this. Through their rigorous after-action reviews, they push decision-making and leadership training down to the lowest possible ranks, so everyone knows how to lead.
Right. If a command structure is eliminated or disrupted, the unit doesn't freeze. The next layer instantly steps up because the leadership capability is distributed, not centralized.
And you combine that with scenario planning, like Royal Dutch Shell preparing for the 1970s oil crises. They mapped out multiple contradictory futures so that when the environment shifted violently, they weren't caught flat-footed.
They already had a playbook ready to go.
Exactly.
But, this raises an important question.
What's that?
How do you execute this in the public sector? Deloitte and Shell have the agility to pivot their entire operating models.
True.
A federal agency operates under rigid congressional oversight, strict fiscal appropriations, and complex union rules. Implementing strategic workforce planning, knowledge capture, and distributed leadership before 11.8% of your expertise walks out the door is an incredibly complex bureaucratic hurdle.
It really is. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Even if you aren't one of the thousands of federal workers directly impacted this month, you are operating inside this volatile labor ecosystem.
We all are.
Whether you are an employee trying to gauge the true health of your company, a manager forced to navigate budget cuts, or a citizen watching your local economy absorb these shocks, understanding the mechanics of downsizing is critical.
Absolutely.
The true cost goes far beyond the balance sheet. Procedural justice, radical transparency, and shifting your focus from job security to relentless employability, these are the actual tools for career survival when that placid 4.3% unemployment rate is hiding massive structural chaos.
And I think there is a vital, lingering question we really have to consider regarding the death of that old psychological contract.
Let's hear it.
If loyalty for security is truly gone forever, and the new model everywhere becomes we will train you to be employable elsewhere, what happens to deep institutional memory?
Oh, that's a good point.
Are we moving toward an economy where everyone is essentially a highly skilled temporary mercenary, renting out their capabilities for a few years at a time?
Wow.
And if so, how does a society tackle massive multi-generational challenges like infrastructure or public health or space exploration if nobody stays at an organization long enough to remember why the foundation was built in the first place?
That definitely makes you look at the morning economic headlines with a lot more skepticism. Keep questioning the numbers beneath the surface. We will see you on the next deep dive.